Gonzaga needs more scoring and shooting on next year's roster, and they have their eyes on a kid who dropped 51 points in a conference tournament game. Folks, that'll work.
You are Locked On Zags, your daily podcast on the Gonzaga Bulldogs. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What is going on, y'all? Happy Wednesday, and welcome into the Locked On Zags podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I'm your host and longtime Gonzaga podcaster, Andy Patton, here to bring you news and updates on all things Zag athletics. Today's episode of Locked On Zags is brought to you by Monarch Money. Take control of your finances with Monarch Money. Use code LOCKEDONCollege at monarchmoney.com for 50% off your first year. Well, we're going to talk about 4 burning questions, topics, storylines for Gonzaga as they head into the offseason. We're going to talk about front court depth, the EK Huff starting lineup. We're going to talk about some transfer portal targets and more just archetypes, like players that we think Gonzaga might go after. We won't get into specifics as much as like they need a backup point guard. They need this. They need this. We'll just talk about recruiting. Gonzaga hasn't been super active in the high school recruiting. Will that change this offseason? We're going to get to all that in the second and third segments of the show. But we're going to start talking about a transfer portal target that we know Gonzaga has already contacted, that we know Gonzaga is already in pursuit of, and that would be North Dakota transfer guard Treysen Eaglestaff. And if you haven't heard this name, it's very understandable. Not a lot of people paying attention to North Dakota basketball or Summit League basketball this year, but he made some headlines earlier this year with some tremendous offensive performances. So we're going to talk about him. He has been in contact with Gonzaga, according to his agent, who communicated this to Joe Tipton of On3, along with a list of basically every high-profile program in college basketball who has been at least checking in on Eaglestaff. He is a 6'6" guard from Bismarck, North Dakota. Something I'm going to be paying close attention to this year is the size of the guards that Gonzaga is pursuing, because they are going to likely go after a handful of guards this offseason in the transfer portal and in the recruiting trail. And for the most part, really since this era, the Ryan Nembhard, Nolan Hickman era of Gonzaga basketball has started, it seems like the staff has made a concerted effort to look for guards who are bigger. Davis Vogel coming in next year, 6'7", Jalen Warley, 6'7". They want some size in the front court or in the back court. So for them, one of the first names we hear in this transfer portal cycle to be a 6'6" guard is something I think we're going to see a lot of this offseason. Eaglestaff has spent his entire career up to this point at North Dakota. Again, he's from Bismarck. Campus is located in Bismarck. He was good right away as a freshman, played about 20 minutes a game, averaged 8.5 points. And then as a sophomore, he rose to averaging about 14.5 points a game in 28.5 minutes. And then he completely exploded his junior year. Played 33 games, were started every single one of them, played about 32 minutes a game. He averaged just under 19 points per game. Didn't do a whole lot outside of scoring, 2.8 rebounds, 2.4 assists. So not terrible, but he's not a point guard. He's a scorer. He's a shooter. 1.1 steals per game as well. Shot about 47% on 2-pointers, shot about 36% on 3-pointers last year. But folks, that was on over 7 3-point attempts per game. And I think that's an important thing to highlight. And I'll use a comparison to a current Zag. I'm going to care a lot more about your volume of 3-point attempts in terms of evaluating your success at Gonzaga next year than your percentage of 3-point attempts. And we don't need to look any further than Michael Ajayi, who shot 47% last year at Pepperdine, but who did that on like barely 2 attempts per game. Michael Ajayi did not shoot a lot of threes last year. And if you watch Pepperdine tape from last year, or 2 years ago, I guess at this point, Ajayi took only wide open 3-pointers. Yes, it's still remarkable that his 3-point percentage plummeted the way that it did at Gonzaga this year. Regardless, my point being, NBA scouts care more about your volume of 3-point attempts in college than your actual percentage. And I think for looking at players to come into Gonzaga and be a volume 3-point shooter or add floor spacing, which the Zags desperately need, I'm going to focus a lot more on how many threes they took. 35.9% is maybe not great. Also worth pointing out, as a junior, Eaglestaff shot 38.3% on 6.5 attempts per game. He was over 40% as a freshman. This is a very good 3-point shooting player. He also can absolutely light it up. North Dakota played Alabama in a non-conference game this year. He dropped 40 in that game against a power conference team. Yes, and Alabama not known for their defense, but anytime a mid-major player can come in and hang 40 on a team with those kind of athletes, at Alabama is a tremendous, tremendous story for Eaglestaff. He also, in the conference tournament, the Summit League tournament, in their second round game against South Dakota State, Eaglestaff hung 51 on the Jackrabbits in that game, 8 of 18 from three. This dude is an absolute shooter, bucket getter. Not a lot of guys had two 40-point games last year. For him to have had one of them against a team that's still playing basketball this year, that's in the Sweet 16, that was in contention to be a number one overall seed, is a sign of what this kid is capable of doing with the basketball in his hands. And like I said, Zags are far from the only team to take notice of this kid at a relatively small school out in North Dakota. Per Joe Tipton, the list of schools that have contacted Eaglestaff. And look, if I were to tell you every single name, we would run out of time on the show. We would be at the full 30 minutes if I were to list all of them. Here are some of the highlights: Kansas, Kentucky, Villanova, St. John's, UCLA, Alabama, Michigan, among many, 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 many other programs. And again, this is just who've contacted him. Some of these contacts are probably just, hey, we're checking in on Eaglestaff. Do you have an idea of what he's looking for in the transfer portal or looking for an NIL? Some of them might be more serious, like, hey, we really want to get him on campus, really want to meet with him. Some of them are, hey, we're interested. We'd like to talk to you more, but we don't know if we're going to have, it depends on if players leave our program. Like the variety of reached out to and contacted is fairly widespread. So I don't even know for Gonzaga, this may be something where they're just checking in. This may be something where they are really interested and invested. I hope it's the latter, because he makes a lot of sense for what Gonzaga needs. It's also, I wanted to point out, worth noting that Alabama saw him hang 40 on them and said, yeah, we should probably reach out to that kid and check in on him. He would be a great fit at Bama if you wanted to. It'd be kind of funny to see him do that. And also worth noting, like, it would not be the first time a player has had a dominant game while at North Dakota and then transferred to said school, because that is exactly what Gino Crandall did about 6 years ago when he dominated against Gonzaga in a game that Gonzaga barely won at home against North Dakota. Crandall, I think he had like 30, 28, something like that. And then he transferred to Gonzaga the next year. His one season in Spokane didn't quite go according to plan, dealing with a hand injury. But Gonzaga has recruited from North Dakota before. So this is certainly a potential advantage that they may have just in terms of familiarity with the program and the staff, and potentially being able to convince Eaglestaff, like, hey, somebody else has done it and had success at the next level, so maybe you can do it as well. And again, we'll talk fit here at Gonzaga. It's pretty obvious. The Zags lost Dusty Stromer to the transfer portal on Monday. He's out the door. Caleb Battle and Nolan Hickman, of course, both out the door. So there are openings at the 2-3 spots, the shooting guard, small forward positions for Gonzaga. Not a ton of openings, mind you. Emmanuel Decente is expected to be back. Jalen Warley is coming into the mix as a player who transferred to Gonzaga from Virginia, spent 3 years at Florida State. He's a defensive-focused player, so is Innocente. They also have Davis Fogel, 6'7" wing as a freshman coming in, and Steele Venters. So on one blush, you look at those four players and you think, well, do they even have room? But here's the deal. Innocente and Warley, they're not scorers. They're not on this roster to score the basketball. Warley's played 30 minutes per game at a high level and averages like 7 points a game. He does not shoot threes. He is a facilitator. He is a defensive player. He is not a scorer. Innocente, we have seen him. He is a ball mover. He is a great on-ball defender. He is not a scorer. That is not going to dramatically change next year. Steele Venters, we don't know his status. We're going to talk about that a little bit later in the show, but he's coming off 2 significant season-ending knee injuries. We don't know if he's going to be healthy. We don't know if he's going to be 100%. We don't really know a whole lot about Steele Venters' status right now. And then Davis Fogel's an incoming freshman who's probably not expected to play a lot of minutes. So in reality, there's a lot of opportunity here for a player to come in. Braden Smith's going to start at the 1, the Colgate transfer who redshirted this past year. We'll talk about the front court later in the show, but the expectation right now is that EK and Huff both are back and starting at the 5 and the 4. And then you have Warley probably starting at the 3. But I think you could slot somebody like Eaglestaff in at the 2 and convince him, like, hey, yeah, obviously we got the two bigs in the front court are going to do a lot of scoring, but we envision you as a guy who scores 10, 12, 15 points a game for us, who shoots a lot of threes, who has opportunities to really impact the game for us on both ends of the floor. And he's not a great defensive player and probably not going to be great at that at the next level, at Gonzaga. But you have Innocente, you have Warley, you have guys who can kind of mitigate his offset his lack of defense at that level. So I think this is a really quality fit, and I'm very interested to see if Gonzaga can kind of, cut their way through what's a tremendous list of programs that are showing interest in him right now, because they could use scoring, they could use shooting, they could use his length on the perimeter. And I think there's a lot of reasons to think this is a really nice fit, at least on paper, for the Zags next season. Well, like I said, folks, we got 4 burning questions as we get into Gonzaga's offseason. We're going to address 2 of those in the next segment, 2 of them to close out the show, coming up here in just a second. But first, folks, get the supplies that you need from the site made for the skilled trades, Supply House. Whether you're in plumbing, HVAC, or electrical work, Supply House is the reliable way to order products online. Their easy-to-use website is packed with helpful resources and the latest product information to help you get the job done right. Plus, with a complete inventory of over 200,000 parts from over 400 plus top brands, you'll find exactly what you need delivered fast from coast to coast. And if you need help with an order, Supply House offers expert support and industry-leading service, so you'll always get a chance to talk to a real person. And for trade pros looking for an extra edge, their free Trade Master program offers exclusive perks like a dedicated phone line, free shipping, and discounts on every order. Thousands of skilled professionals are already taking advantage, so now it's your turn. Join the Trade Master program today at supplyhouse.com/TM and start ordering plumbing, HVAC, and electrical supplies with just a few clicks. Plus, use promo code SH5 for 5% off your first order. That's supplyhouse.com. All right, folks, segment 2, still Andy Patton, still Locked On Zags podcast. Moving away from our second, transfer portal target segment of the offseason. Folks, there's going to be a lot of these. Last year, we didn't get as many because Gonzaga filled out their roster pretty fast, but with a lot of spots available, I think there's going to be a lot of transfer portal talk this offseason. I'm personally looking forward to it. I love digging in to these guys, so I'm thinking it's going to be a lot of fun. We're moving on from that for right now to talk about our 4 burning questions for Gonzaga, 4 storylines, 4 things we're going to be keeping a close eye on this offseason. Number 1, it was a big storyline at the end of the season for Gonzaga. The last 3 games Gonzaga played, the win over St. Mary's in the WCC championship game, the win over Georgia in the first round of the NCAA tournament, and the heartbreaking loss to Houston in the round of 32. The starting lineup for Gonzaga was changed. It had Graham Ike starting at the 5, which we were used to, as well as Braden Huff stepping into the starting lineup at the 4. And we talked about this a lot from the context of it made sense to do this against St. Mary's, who they'd already played twice and who, I think they wanted to give them a different look. It made sense to do it against a Georgia team that had a ton of size with Samto Cyril and Asa Newell in the front court. And it made sense to do it against Houston because, frankly, it had worked in the last 2 games, and why mess with a recipe that seems to be really working? But one thing we didn't really talk about from that perspective that I think merits a lot of discussion at this point is that it may have been a move to kind of ensure that you can keep both these players heading into next season. Because if Graham Ike returns, which as of right now, as of this recording, he has not made any indication one way or another. When he has been asked about it, he has said, I'm focused on right now. I'm thinking about this upcoming game or whatever. After the season, he basically said, I haven't thought about it yet. I believe him. I think he's justified in wanting a little bit of time to make that decision, whether he's going to go professional or come back to Gonzaga for another year. I don't think he'd enter the transfer portal. In theory, he could, but that would be surprising to me. But if Graham were to return, I think there was fear that could cause Braden Huff to leave because he doesn't want to be a backup center for a 3rd year, which, again, would be very justified on Braden Huff's part, especially after how he played down the stretch of the season. So Mark Few says, well, let's start them both and see if that works. And now you can convince both of them, like, hey, we'd love to have you both back. Graham, if you want to come back for your final year of eligibility, great. You're going to have a similar role. Braden, if you want to come back, we're not envisioning you playing 10, 15 minutes off the bench necessarily. You can start. You guys can both play 20-plus minutes a night. We think this can work. And they have evidence that it does, that it can. I mean, it's only a couple game sample size, but it looked pretty darn good. And with Ben Gray out the door and Michael Ajayi, we don't know his status exactly. We're going to talk about that in a second, a little bit of a preview for you there. But this could work. And I think it served a purpose to help them beat St. Mary's, to help them, counteract the size of Georgia and the physicality of Houston. But it also works as like hey, we know this can work. And we want to convince you both to come back and try this thing out for a full year because teams are not going to be, look what Michigan did this year. For those of you who follow college basketball more nationally, Michigan started 7-footer Vlad Golden at the center spot, and he's a traditional back to the basket center. He is very much your Graham Ike, Drew Timme type. He's a bit more physical. That's who he is. And then Danny Wolf played away from the rim. He's also 7-footer. Wolf had more ball handling skills and more facilitation skills than a Braden Huff does, but they were able to succeed a ton this year with 2 7-footers in the starting lineup. It can be done. And Mark Few seems willing to try it because the alternative is probably losing one of these 2 guys, and they're 2 of the most talented players on this roster. I'm extremely interested to see what happens here. When you couple the fact that Ben Gregg's gone, when you couple the fact that Michael Ajayi may be gone, again, we don't know there, I think you have to be willing to let these two guys start and play together. And I think, again, it's the only way you keep them both. So I'm really interested to see what decision these two guys make and whether Gonzaga is willing to give this a shot next year. That's a big storyline into this offseason. And then the next one is about Michael Ajayi as well as Steele Venters, two players that are kind of up in the air right now. Obviously, any player in theory is up in the air, but I don't expect Ismail Adiani to transfer. I don't expect Emmanuel Innocente to transfer. Like, I think that for the most part, the rest of the roster is fairly well established. Ike and Huff being somewhat question marks. I think Ike is really the question mark. I think if he were to leave, Braden Huff would clearly stay. But if Ike were to return, Huff may have a decision to make on his hands. But Ajayi is a player who, I've explained this a few times, but I'll reiterate it for those coming in more recently. He actually still has eligibility remaining. Ajayi spent 2 years at the junior college level in Puyallup, Washington, and then he spent 1 year at Pepperdine, and then he transferred to Gonzaga and spent 1 year at Gonzaga. That's 4 years. In theory, he should be done. However, a ruling came down from the NCAA following a lawsuit from a quarterback at Vanderbilt that said the JUCO year shouldn't count against me because I couldn't make NIL at the junior college level. And the NCAA has basically said, we're going to let this lawsuit play out. But in the meantime, if you are a graduating senior who is out of eligibility and who has utilized junior college seasons as part of your eligibility, you will be granted an extra year. So Michael Ajayi falls into that category as a player who would be out of eligibility at the end of this year, but now has an extra year of eligibility while the NCAA sorts out what they're going to do about junior college eligibility going forward. We have not heard anything from Michael Ajayi directly or even indirectly that I have seen about his plans for next year. But as a player who was expected to go to the NBA draft, who was in the draft conversation last offseason, he came to Gonzaga and his draft stock got worse. He did not shoot the three ball well. We know the Michael Ajayi story this year. It took him a long time to get comfortable. He looked better down the stretch. There's a lot of reasons to believe that Ajayi would come back to Gonzaga. He'd in theory have a bigger role next year without Ben Gregg in the mix. He's more comfortable in the system, more comfortable in the offense, could boost the three-point shooting, work on that, and be better in that area. I think there's a lot of pros to Michael Ajayi coming back to Spokane. He may choose not to do it. He may have had his heart set on going pro after this year. Maybe he decides he wants to hit the portal and go somewhere else. I don't know. But that's a really interesting storyline for Gonzaga. If you get Huff, Ike, and Ajayi back, and then you have Ismail Adiani in the mix, you have a pretty well-set front court. I still think they might make an addition there, but you're feeling pretty good. Whereas if you lose Ike and Ajayi, suddenly you got a lot of holes to fill in the front court. And then there's the Steele Venters of it all. Steele Venters, he's not transferring. He's not leaving. But the question is just, is he going to be healthy? Is he going to be 100%? Will he ever be 100% again? 2 days before his first season in Spokane, not this last season, but the season before that, Steele Venters suffered an injury and missed the entire year with a torn ACL. While rehabbing over the summer, Steele Venters injured himself again and missed all of this most recent season. He has now been at Gonzaga for 2 years and has yet to play a game with the Bulldogs. This is a kid who's from Central Washington, who spent the first few years of his career at Eastern Washington, who always wanted to play for Gonzaga. If Steele Venters is able to get healthy enough to play Division I college basketball, he's doing it at Gonzaga. I feel pretty confident about that. I just don't know how confident I feel that that's going to happen. 2 full years without being able to play game action of college basketball because of significant injuries to your knees is devastating and could very much be the end of his career. There has been no indication either way other than he's rehabbing and he's working hard to get back. That's all we really know. So the plan is for him to try to get back and play next year. That's the expectation. That's the plan. I don't want to say skeptical, but until we get a solid, concrete update, yes, he's playing 5-on-5. Yes, he's doing these drills. Yes, he's on track to be back by this time, which we may not get that update for a while. We may not get that update until late in the summer. In fact, I expect that that's when we would get this update is sometime in like August, September. So I wouldn't hold my breath for any updates on Steele Venters' status. But it does change the equation for how Gonzaga pursues this offseason. Do they go after a shooter, like a guy like Eaglestaff? I think they go after him regardless. But if Venters is also in the mix and you get in a shooter, now you're kind of full in those spots. So you're probably not adding any more wings. Maybe you add a backup point guard and call it good. But again, it changes how Gonzaga pursues this offseason because right now their roster is really lacking three-point shooting. You have Warley and Innocente and Braden Smith, who's a decent three-point shooter, but you don't have a lot of shooting on the wings. Venters would give you that instantly if you felt confident that he was able to step in and play a big role for your team next year. If you don't think he can, you desperately need three-point shooting. If you do think he can, you still probably need three-point shooting, because I don't think you're going to rely on Venters for 30 minutes a night or anything like that. And even if you do, even if he does play a lot, he can't be your only good three-point shooter. But it changes the kind of desperation level in terms of finding three-point shooting on the wing specifically. And as a reminder for Venters, yeah, he's mostly a three-point shooter, but this is a dude who averaged 17 points a game at Eastern Washington. He was the Big Sky Player of the Year over Dalton Knecht. Like, this is a really good basketball player. Again, what version of Steele Venters we get after 2 years off remains to be seen, but it is a huge storyline for Gonzaga coming in to this upcoming season. Well, folks, we got 2 more burning questions we're going to answer to close out the show. What types of players Gonzaga might pursue in the transfer portal? We've touched on that a little bit already, but we're going to get a bit more in-depth into it. Plus, the 2026 recruiting class hasn't been a whole lot of names, hasn't been a whole lot of attention on that class. We'll talk about what we know and what we think might happen going forward. All that coming up here in just a second. But first, folks, do you ever check your bank account and wonder, where the heck did all my money go? Between dining out, online shopping, and entertainment, it's easy to lose track. And that's where Monarch Money comes in. Your personal CFO, giving you full visibility and control over your finances. Monarch Money isn't just a budgeting app, it's a complete financial command center. And you can track all your accounts, investments, and spending in one place, so you can stop managing your money and start building wealth. Instead of juggling multiple apps, you can use Monarch to check your finances, track spending, and even plan long-term goals. My wife and I always want to make sure that we are on the same page when it comes to finances, and thankfully with Monarch Money, managing money with your partner is smoother than ever. You can track shared and personal accounts, set goals, and stay on the same page without all the stress. So take control of your finances with Monarch Money. Use code LOCKEDONCollege at monarchmoney.com for 50% off your first year. That's monarchmoney.com, code LOCKEDONCollege for half off your first year. Next up, folks, get ready to bring your favorite Zags to life with VarsityIcons.com. They deliver the ultimate collection of action figures that honor both current and former Zags. Varsity Icons is the premier sports collectible figure for your Gonzaga Bulldogs. And today we're highlighting everybody's fan favorite, Ben Gregg. Varsity Icons was started by a longtime Gonzaga fan who wanted to create collectible figures of everybody's all-time favorite Zags. The mission of Varsity Icons is to create figures of current and former Zags for everybody to collect and enjoy. And there's no question that Varsity Icons wanted to highlight Ben Gregg to be their first player. He's been a fan favorite since he joined the Zags back in 2021. Ben exemplifies what it means to be a Zag every time he steps on the court. We are excited to create more of your favorite Zags in the future, so stay tuned and order your Varsity Icons Ben Gregg figure today at varsityicons.com. Varsity Icons, where icons live forever. All right, folks, segment 3, still Andy Patton, still Locked On Zags podcast. We got our 2 more burning questions to answer as we are now in the early part of Gonzaga's offseason after their elimination from the NCAA tournament last weekend by Houston in the round of 32. We talked about Treysen Eaglestaff, a player from North Dakota that Gonzaga is pursuing the transfer portal. We also talked about the Huff frontcourt and whether that's going to be a big part of Gonzaga's roster next year. We talked about Michael Ajayi's eligibility, Steele Venters coming off that injury. And now we're going to kind of talk about the player archetypes we expect Gonzaga to pursue in the transfer portal. And obviously, this kind of ties into the previous conversations we've had already on the show today, because it depends. It depends on what Graham Ike does, because I think what Graham Ike does will inform what Braden Huff does, and the depth in the center position could be significant, where you have Ike, Huff, and Diani, and you don't need any help there. It could be you have 1 or 2 of those guys, and you need a little bit more help. Michael Ajayi, similar situation. Power forward depth's already kind of weak right now, but without Ajayi, it becomes a much more dire situation. I think Gonzaga is still going to look for a power forward in the portal. I think that there is a reasonable chance that they're looking for a high-level power forward. And I think that would be if they're feeling like Ike is going to leave, Huff's going to start at the 5, and you want a power forward to start at the 4 in case Ajayi leaves, or even if he stays, you add a power forward and have Ajayi come off the bench. I think that's reasonable. We already know they've pursued Owen Freeman, who averaged 17 points per game in 19 games at Iowa last year, was the Big Ten Freshman of the Year his first year, was a dominant force for the Hawkeyes last year before going down with that injury. Gonzaga is one of 4 schools known to be in contact with him. He would be a player who would start and play 30 minutes a game for Gonzaga if he were to go here. So that's a potential kind of indication that Gonzaga is looking at some big names in the front court to add to this program. And there are some big names in the front court who are already available. We're not even going to talk about some of the super big names necessarily, although some of them are out there, but some like semi-realistic potential targets for Gonzaga. We just saw Mikey Ratai, who was just excellent at Oregon State. We all remember him, young 28 on the Zags in that game in Corvallis. Was one of the best players in the WCC this past season as a potential NBA player. He's in the transfer portal. He makes a lot of sense. Mookie Cook, who transferred entered the transfer portal out of the University of Oregon, he went to Oregon out of high school, but it was a top 3 of Oregon, Kentucky, and Gonzaga, so they were in the mix for him out of high school. McDonald's All-American, has had some injury issues, but I think would be a very fun small ball 4 type player for Gonzaga if they were to get him. He's a bit of a risk. He hasn't played all that well, but he's been injured for most of his career at Oregon. A couple guys from the University of Virginia who both have Pacific Northwest ties, Blake Buchanan and Jacob Kofi. Kofi entered the portal. He went to Eastside Catholic High School in Seattle, was not pursued by Gonzaga, but wanted to be pursued by Gonzaga out of high school, wanted to take a visit there. For whatever reason, the Zags didn't have a ton of interest in him. He was tremendous for Virginia this year. He's a scorer. He's not a great shooter yet, but he's got a lot of size. He's a good rebounder, very good on-ball defensive player. Would be a really great fit for Gonzaga. Blake Buchanan from Coeur d'Alene, Idaho, so 15 minutes away from Spokane. Stretch 4 type could be a solid fit for Gonzaga as well. There's other big names. Bryce Hopkins from Providence is one that comes to mind. Mackenzie Mbako from Indiana comes to mind, like some bigger names that they could pursue there. But yeah, I'm curious where they will kind of divert some of that attention in the transfer portal. And I think a shooting guard or a high-level scorer makes sense. We already talked about Treysen Eaglestaff, so that type of player. I won't throw a bunch of other names at you, but that type of player I think makes a ton of sense for Gonzaga, and again is kind of dependent on the Steele Venters situation. And then a backup point guard is, I think, a near certainty. I think if you want to write something in pen that's going to happen this offseason, Gonzaga is going to land a backup point guard because they have Braden Smith, who has not played for Gonzaga. He obviously sat all of last year as a redshirt, but he's your point guard. The rest of the rosters, they don't have point guards. They don't have point guards right now. Innocente, nowhere close to being a point guard. Jalen Warley's kind of a point forward type, so maybe in a pinch you use him there the way that Gonzaga used Caleb Battle as a point guard in a pinch. They're not similar players, but I mean like the way that they didn't use him there very often, but they did when they needed to. But I think you got to find a backup point guard. You got to find a backup point guard. Whether it's a transfer, whether it's a late European signing like Luka Krajinovic or a late freshman signing. I don't think Davis Fogel's a pure point guard. I don't think they envision him in that role. So maybe they do. But if they are looking at a backup point guard, we're not talking about like Donovan Dent from New Mexico. We're not talking about Mo Odom from Pepperdine. Those guys aren't coming to Gonzaga to play a backup point guard role. It's just not going to happen. It's going to be somebody that's not on the radar. It's going to be somebody that frankly we probably haven't heard of. Think Geno Crandall type. Think Aaron Cook type. Those types of players who come to Gonzaga to play a backup point guard role for a year and then bounce. I think that's a very, very good likelihood that Gonzaga is going to pursue somebody of that nature to come into this program for next season. And then I think the last question is, what is Gonzaga going to do on the recruiting trail? Because they had their name, they've had their eyes set on some top freshmen recently, but they haven't landed anybody. They didn't land Zoom Diallo, he went to Washington. They didn't land Asa Newell, he went to Georgia. And then they beat him in the NCAA tournament. They didn't land Isaiah Harwell. They didn't land Nick Kamenia. They didn't land Kingston Flemings, who are all 2025 prospects that Gonzaga has been pursuing in some cases for many years. And then instead, the only freshman they have coming in is Davis Fogel. We haven't heard a lot of targets for Gonzaga in 2026. Sam Funches, top 5 center in the 2026 class, top 20 overall guy. But he canceled his visit to Gonzaga this past February and kind of feels like he's pretty locked in to either Mississippi or Mississippi State. He's kind of the only like really high profile 2026 player Gonzaga has been at all connected to. Now we heard there he's connected to Dean Ruckert, who's from Provo, who's a top 20 small forward in the 2026 class. We've heard Alec Alston, the Serbian sniper, as they call him. He's like a borderline top 100 prospect in the 2026 class. So not a huge name necessarily, but we haven't heard many others. There's a few other names floating around out there, and we'll dig more into them as the offseason goes along and we kind of hear updates on the recruiting trail. But for the most part, Gonzaga has been fairly quiet on the 2026 recruiting trail. And I think if you're looking for a storyline to follow this offseason, does that change? Does Gonzaga look to get a bit more active in the 2026 or maybe even 2027 recruiting classes? We know they're pretty focused on transfer portal additions right now. but it's something to definitely keep an eye on. Folks, that's going to wrap it up for me today here on the Locked On Zags podcast. Thank you so much for making the show your first listen or your first watch of the day. Thanks for sticking with us, too, as we get into the offseason. Season's over, but the Locked On Zags podcast rolls on 5 days a week from now until August. We're going to be doing 5 shows a week, so plenty to get to, plenty of transfers to discuss, plenty of other stuff to get to as the offseason rolls on. So stick with us here. Hit that subscribe button if you have not done so yet. It is very, very much appreciated. As always, we want to say thank you for listening. And of course, go Zags.